going on? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show, DRFTV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forums Twitter handle at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forums Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. This is the preview edition, or the recap edition, I should say, of the Matt Bernier Show. Taking a look back at racing from this past weekend. That would be the weekend of June the 23rd. We've got racing from Thistledown. The Ohio Derby we'll recap. We'll go over two graded races from closing weekend out at Santa Anita, as well as a nice long-distance race north of the border from our friends at Woodbine. If you listen to this podcast, like most of you do, and for this edition, it will have to be in podcast form because of travel issues coming back from Wisconsin this weekend. You've got YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and video.drf.com. You listen on YouTube, click that subscribe button. You'll get all the latest offerings from DRFTV. Give us a thumbs up as well. Over on iTunes, leave us a nice little rating and review. It would be greatly appreciated. We'll also give you a very brief montage of stakes racing from this weekend and the latest as far as the best from a Beyer speed figure standpoint. We will get ready for a nice big week of racing upcoming. You've got big racing from Belmont Park, particularly big racing from north of the border at Woodbine. We'll dive into all that in the DRF TV schedule, wrapping things up here on the recap edition. But without further ado, let's kick things off. Let's take a look at the Ohio Derby and the horses that contested it. 1 1/8 on the main track, 3-year-olds. It was a big race. You had a field of 11 signed on. The favorite ultimately ended up being Lone Sailor. He was a horse that had danced in many of the big dances for the 3-year-olds throughout the Triple Crown campaign, but you had some interesting alternatives, including a horse like Flame Away, who we know what he's capable of on his best day, and a horse like Core Beliefs coming in from Southern California. He seemed like a bit of an up-and-comer, a little bit lightly raced, and perhaps a forward move comes here. Well, certainly, it's actually what happened. Here's the stretch run of this year's Ohio Derby.
Here comes Core Beliefs on the far outside. Title Ready is there. Lone Sailor tries the inside. Trigger Warning in front. Core Beliefs surging on the outside. 1 furlong to go. And here is Core Beliefs to take the lead. Lone Sailor's found a seam. He's coming up the rail to 16th to go. Core Beliefs and Lone Sailor. Lone Sailor gaining ground. Core Beliefs on the outside. Here it is. Core Beliefs.
Core Beliefs gets the job done for Peter Urton. He wins the Ohio Derby, a Grade 3 event at odds of 5-2. He was the third choice in the wagering. The runner-up is the favorite Lone Sailor at odds of 7-5, and the third place finisher is Trigger Warning at odds of 86-1. If you played that trifecta, it comes back a healthy $366.60 for a buck. Let's talk about Core Beliefs, your winner, a little bit more. He's 2 of 6 lifetime. He has never been out of the money from 6 lifetime starts, over $535,000 in career earnings. Owned by Gary Broad, trained by Peter Urton, bred by Thomas J. Young in Kentucky, ridden to victory by Joe Talamone. You can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He's by Quality Road, out of a Tactical Advantage mare named Tahati, or Tajati. I would imagine it's Tahati. That would be my guess. Core Beliefs earns a 93 Beyer speed figure along with Lone Sailor. They each earn 93s. Core Beliefs comes home in 13:02. Lone Sailor in 13 seconds flat. I'm a little bit torn on this race as a whole because it's difficult for me to get super excited about the result when the third place finisher is Trigger Warning, who has been well beaten in other route races in the past. And sure, he's a nice little horse, but I don't think anyone is mistaking him for potentially a legitimate major 3-year-old throughout the rest of the year. When he runs third, only beaten by a little more than a length at 86-1. Makes me wonder a little bit about what was going on in this race, what other sort of efforts were there. Core Beliefs, I don't want to take too much away from him, considering he was pretty wide throughout. I don't know that Joe Talamo could have done anything differently given the post position and where he ultimately started from, but I thought, all things considered, it was a good effort from Core Beliefs, and he's still relatively lightly raced, so there's no reason to think that he won't continue to improve. I do have reservations about ultimately what is the ceiling for a horse like this. Not to say that he can't improve, but can he improve enough to win and be competitive in races like, I'm just throwing races out there, the Haskell or the Travers or any of those kind for the 3-year-old Pennsylvania Derby here in a few months. I think he's a nice horse. I just don't know what the scope is for a horse like this, especially when you compare that to Lone Sailor. Lone Sailor, it kind of feels like we know what he is at this point. He's a horse that's going to come from a little bit farther off the pace, and at this time around, he was actually mid-pack throughout, but a 93 Beyer, that's kind of Lone Sailor. He's going to be in that low to mid 90 range, and I don't foresee a giant forward move coming from him either. He's run so many times, it kind of feels like you got what you got here. So then when Trigger Warning, who's up there pushing the pace, and the fractions were honest early on, especially 22-3, half mile and 47-1, and he's done most of his damage going 6 furlongs. It makes me wonder, well, did nobody else do any real running from the back of the pack? You look and see a horse like Diamond King. For some reason, he was strangled back early on. And again, I know they went fast, but unless you were just terrified that he couldn't get the distance if he was that close to the pace, then I don't know. I feel like they've taken the best asset away from this horse. And now if they do eventually choose to turn him back in distance, how far back is he going to be now if you've taken away that early gas that he once had? A horse like Flame Away, I guess you can be a little bit kinder to him because he was up on the engine, but at the same time, so was Trigger Warning. And guess what? Trigger Warning was actually carrying ground. Flame Away, this is the first really just terrible performance from him, and it makes me wonder a little bit where he is form-wise. This is his first start since the Kentucky Derby. Maybe he needs a little bit of time, needs to go away for a little bit, because the best thing about a horse like Flame Away was always his tenacity, and he wanted to go out there and fight you, and he had nothing. He had no fight in this spot. I wonder a little bit about the outside flow. It felt like horses toward the outer portion of the running did a little bit better, but at the same time, I don't think that is the reason that many of these horses performed the way that they did for one reason or another. I suppose Title Ready was in a little bit tight at the top of the lane, forced to angle out over heels, and he finished with a little bit of interest. He came home in 13 flat as well for that final eighth of a mile. But he's another one. It feels like he does his best running when he's on the lead, and in many instances, if he's not fast enough to make the top, maybe you just get an effort like this where it's enough for a minor award. I don't mean to make it sound like I'm just throwing a wet blanket on the party here, but it just kind of feels like this was a little bit of an unfulfilling race, in my opinion. I would have liked to have seen any one of these horses take a big step forward, and I'm not entirely sure that we did. If anything, I think we saw some horses take steps back. And perhaps I'm basing too much of this on Trigger Warning's performance. But it's hard not to. When you go through and look, and I'm going to pull up the PPs for the race right now, when I go through and look at Trigger Warning coming into this race, his most recent run was a victory in the Tom Ridge at Presque Isle Downs. That was going 6 furlongs. He had routed twice in his life. Once was the Lecomte's, complete, just draw a line through. He earned a -0. And then you go to the Mind That Bird Derby where he's beaten by 100. It just, to me, this was a very difficult, and he was trending the right direction, don't get me wrong. But this was a difficult result for me to kind of wrap my mind around, that you were only beaten a little more than a length against from horses that it seemed like their ceiling was a heck of a lot higher than yours. And I do use that sort of thought process, especially with these 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds, even when we get to the real 2-year-old racing. You know, what is looking forward? What can I expect from them? Can I expect them to move forward? And with a horse like Trigger Warning, who has now gone out, this was his 11th lifetime start, you know, I don't know that he has much more room for improvement. So again, the fact that a horse like Lone Sailor, this was start number 11. He's 1 for 11 now, and the 93, that's sort of where he's been living, in that low to mid 90 range. I think he's a nice little horse, but I don't know that you're going to get much more out of him. Core Beliefs would be the one where, again, it feels like ultimately he is so lightly raced. He continues to improve. He ran well enough in the Peter Pan. He's the only horse so far that has made the Peter Pan look respectable. Everybody else is bombed. And the Santa Anita Derby, you don't want to hold that against him because he's defeated by the Triple Crown champion and Bolt Doro, who, again, we know on Bolt Doro's best day, it's been a while since we've seen his best, but we know on his best day he can run. Core Beliefs feels like the only horse that you really want out of here. I'd like to give Diamond King another chance, but again, it feels like they've just taken away his absolute best asset recently. It's wrangling him back to the back. If you don't think he can stay this distance, then don't run him at these races. Run him going short, or run him 7/8 of a mile, 1-turn mile, because I still think there's ability there. But when he's handled and ridden in this fashion, boy, it's just very difficult to envision a scenario where he's going to be able to win against better horses. Because, again, keep in mind, this was a grade 3, and to me it feels like a grade 3 for these 3-year-olds, because we know what some of the best 3-year-olds are capable of. I'm not even including Justify. The water's only going to get deeper from here for all of these boys coming out of this race. Flame Away, again, he may be the one that you want to just say, he needs a bit of a breather, or perhaps he needed a race, but he hasn't been gone for that long. It's only been 6-7 weeks as far as the layoff is concerned. Disappointing effort from him, and who knows, we'll find out if there's anything to come out of that. But the up-and-comer of this entire group, and perhaps, again, maybe there is a forward move down the lane, is Core Beliefs for Peter Urton. Wide trip, but he still gets the job done. Joe Talamo, he made the best of what was given to him as far as the draw was concerned, and he was on a very talented horse. Core Beliefs gets the job done in the Grade 3 Ohio Derby with a 93 Beyer speed figure. Main event at Santa Anita on Saturday was an interesting one, going back and taking a look and seeing how the race was run. Here's the field for the San Carlos, contested at 7/8 of a mile on the main track, 3-year-olds and up. The name to beat in here was American Anthem, going out for Baffert and Smith and all the same familiar faces that we're accustomed to as far as these sort of connections are concerned in big races. Coming into this race on the heels of a game and workmanlike effort in his return to the races at Churchill Downs just a few weeks back, he was the horse that was the name, that had the pedigree, had the connections, and look, on paper he was the horse to beat, but he had registered some underwhelming performances in instances where he probably shouldn't have. He should have performed better than he did last year as a 3-year-old. And that was just one of those things that lingered with me leading into a race like this. At what was going to be a short price, ultimately odds of 4 to 5. Could you trust him? Well, he made the folks that trusted him sweat it out. Here's Michael Ronan with the stretch run at this year's San Carlos.
St. Joe Bay with American Anthem. Joint leadership for them at the top of the lane. From El Huerfano and Stonehands. Touching Rainbows dropping away. Passed by Horse Greedy. American Anthem with the lead over St. Joe Bay. St. Joe Bay sticking gamely to his guns as coming back at American Anthem. American Anthem will have to show some ticker. St. Joe Bay almost matching him. It's very close between them. St. Joe Bay coming back at American Anthem.
American Anthem does win. He wins by a head over St. Joe Bay at odds of 4 to 5. St. Joe Bay, the longest shot on the board, runs a game second at odds of 42 to 1. And Horse Greedy rounds out your trifecta at odds of 18 to 1. Let's take a look in depth at American Anthem. He is 5 of 10 lifetime. He's been in the money on 8 of 10 occasions. He's over $673,000 in career earnings. Owned by Windstar Farm LLC, Head of Plains Partners LLC, China Horse Club, and SF Racing LLC. Trained by Bob Baffert, ridden to victory by Mike Smith. Bred by Windstar Farm LLC in Kentucky. You can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He's by Bodemeister, out of an AP Indy mare named Indy's Windy. Now, here is where things get a little bit interesting. As far as winning Beyer speed figure is concerned, 105 for both American Anthem and St. Joe Bay. Why do I say that with sort of speculation in my voice? When you go through, and I'm going to pull it up right here, you can look in Formulator at the most recent 10 Beyer speed figures earned by each competitor in the race. And when I go through this and see, okay, well, the most recent run here for American Anthem was the fastest race of his career, 105 Beyer. St. Joe Bay, he had that one stretch at the beginning of last year that he got really, really good. And he still eclipsed that with a career best Beyer here on Saturday afternoon with a 105. Then I go to Horse Greedy. Horse Greedy is a nice horse, and we'll dive into him a little bit more. He's actually the horse that I want coming out of this race. He has paired up a career Beyer best of 101 these past 2 races. But then you get to El Huerfano. El Huerfano at one time could run mid to high 90s, so I suppose a 93 is not impossible, but it kind of feels like this number, and again, making figs is not an exact science. I wish it were, and I think some of the subjectivity is a little bit, tough, but it has to be done from time to time. I look at this, though, and it feels very much like the numbers for Dabster and Stonehands were the ones that were sort of easiest to slot in and say, yeah, you know what, these numbers, they mesh. Because Dabster earned a 93 and Stonehands a 92. Stonehands is always in that low 90 range. And Dabster, his career best Beyer prior to this, was a 94 in his most recent start. So the 93, certainly not out of the realm of possibility. It just makes me wonder a little bit. Do you think that both American Anthem and St. Joe Bay ran the best races of their lives? Entirely possible. The 105s that each of them earned are the best of their careers, and they were a length and 3/4 clear of the third-place finisher, Horse Greedy. I wonder if it's slightly inflated. I wonder if it's just a little bit on the high side. As far as the visuals are concerned, I hated how hard American Anthem had to work, but the fact that he got it done, I suppose that's a feather in his cap for saying that he's game and he wants to win. St. Joe Bay, you have to feel kind of bad for him because he's just that old hard hitter. He's 6 years old, and you know he at one time was one of the nice sprinters in Southern California, and then he tailed off form. Now he goes out for John Sadler, and he fires a big effort here. But again, do you really trust that the 105 that St. Joe Bay earned here? I mean, we're talking 105. That puts you as a fringe contender for a race like the Breeders' Cup Sprint. I'm not ready to sit here and say that St. Joe Bay is that kind of horse anymore. I'm not ready to say that American Anthem is that kind of horse. American Anthem's going to get bet off of this effort. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't, I don't think it was great. I don't think it was the 105 kind of number that I'm going to look at next time wherever he shows up and say, he's the horse to beat, strictly the horse to beat. I don't think so. Not based on what I saw visually and also questioning a little bit about the number. The way that the race was run, though, with those two horses out there basically duking it out the entire way, I am that much more intrigued with horse Greedy coming out of this race. Now, where he shows up next time, who knows? We'll find out. I thought this was a very intriguing effort, though, because he was wide throughout, and he was coming from well off the pace, and he is the only part of this race, the only horse in the entire race, to make up any legitimate ground in here when you consider that the top two went 1-2 throughout. And even some of the other off-the-pace horses, they weren't even close to horse Greedy. To me, this was a very, very intriguing effort. Now, the problem is going to be, where do you run him? Because do I really believe that he can win a Grade 1 race? Or something along those lines, a race like the Pat O'Brien or one of those down at Del Mar? Man, I think it would be kind of a hard, hard sell, kind of a tall order. But anything is possible. It's horse racing. You never know. But I think this is a better effort than it's going to look on paper for horse Greedy because no one else did any real running, and the pace held up entirely. He is the horse that I would want out of this race. You had a couple of really disappointing efforts in here. Disappointing effort out of Stonehands, disappointing effort out of Dabster, disappointing effort out of Touching Rainbows. Touching Rainbows, it bothered me how hard he had to work against Mo Candy in that most recent run. And I just, getting out at 7/8 of a mile, I didn't love his chances coming into this. He was defeated as your second choice odds of 5-2. Dabster is who I ultimately chose in here. When he opened up as chilly as he did on the board, I was immediately concerned. The running style didn't help his cause, but I can't use that as the excuse because he and Horse Greedy were basically right there with one another throughout the early portions of the run. Horse Greedy went on with it, Dabster did not. Disappointing effort from him. And Stonehands, I guess, I don't even know if I want to call this disappointing because Stonehands, it felt like, you know what, you were going to get the test this time around. At any other time that they've tried to jack him up in class, it just hasn't worked. So I kind of feel like he runs to, if he gets a little bit softer company, he can flourish. If he takes on the big boys, he just can't cut the mustard. To me, again, this is an instance where American Anthem, he got the job done, and he earned a career best buyer of 105. But he's just the kind of horse coming out of a race like this. I'm going to be anxious to try to find a horse to defeat him with. Wherever he should show up next, I'm going to try to beat American Anthem. You need to make the decision. Do you want to try to go with him and side with the big number, or do you want to play against him? American Anthem gets the job done over a gutsy St. Joe Bay in the San Carlos. But to me, the horse that I want coming out of this is the other John Sadler horse, third place finisher, Horse Greedy. Let's head up to Woodbine, take a look at the field for the Singspiel. This is a race contested at 1.5 miles on the turf course, a field of 8. I have to be honest, the wagering was a little bit surprising in here because I really figured Final Copy, the horse that won the local prep for this race in gate-to-wire fashion, I really figured he was going to take the lion's share of the money, especially because it looked like he was controlling speed. And to see him go off at odds of 6-1 and to be as cold as he was early on, that was huge red flag. After that, the fact that a horse like Danish Dynaformer was taking the lion's share of the money and went off as your favorite at odds of 5-2, to me, this just felt like a wide open race. But realistically, when you see the way that the race was run, one horse I think was miles the best, and that was your winner coming in for Graham Motion. Here's the stretch run of this year's Singspiel.
Track, Camelot Kitten running on well, and Pumpkin Rumble's coming alive from the back. Pumpkin Rumble hooks to the center as Camelot Kitten goes to the front. Down the center, Pumpkin Rumble, then Johnny Bear, and here's Shah Rose over the top of them. Shah Rose on the outside. Alan Garcia and Shah Rose ranging up on the outside. And what a performance in the Singspiel. Shah Rose has come from last, and Shah Rose burning away to win it. Shah Rose by 2 lengths to Pumpkin Rumble. Final Copy and Camelot Kitten.
Shah Rose gets the job done at odds of 5-1, a generous price. Wins by 2 lengths over Pumpkin Rumble at odds of 9-2, and Final Copy, your pace setter, runs third at odds of 6-1. This was a juicy exacta for $2, comes back 74.20, and a trifecta for $2 comes back 388.90, with 3 very logical horses, in my opinion. Camelot Kitten rounds out your superfecta. Let's talk a little bit about Shah Rose, the winner. Now 6 times in the exacta from 8 lifetime starts. 3 of them victories, over $187,000 in career earnings, owned by Eclipse Thoroughbred Partners and Head of Plains Partners, LLC, trained by Graham Motion, bred by Aga Khan Studs SC in Ireland. And you can see Alan Garcia was the victorious rider, and the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card by Holy Roman Emperor out of a Bari mare named Shireen. 93 Beyer speed figure for Shaw Rose came home in 23:14. Pumpkin Rumble earns a 90 Beyer. Final Copy in 88. Camelot Kitten in 88. Johnny Bear in 88 Beyer. All of them on a level playing field. 6.5 lengths back to Danish Dynaformer. Now, this race, to me, it boils down to Shaw Rose. We've seen a number of instances where Graham Motion is not afraid to ship horses to Canada. Usually when he does, they're well intended. They are in good form coming in, and they run good and representative races. If you back this horse, though, out of the gate, you had to be a little bit concerned because this horse broke about as poorly as you possibly could. And the fact that he was able to recover and overcome that poor start, I think it, one, speaks volumes to his ability, but also probably a little bit of a negative for the rest of the runners in this spot. I think it's also interesting to note, if you go through and look at the way that this race was run in the race chart, the top two finishers were last and second to last throughout the majority of the running. If you're looking at just pure rides in this race, I think if you were a fan of the second, third, or fourth place finishers, you really could not have asked for anything more from a ride standpoint. And heck, you really can't fault Alan Garcia for anything that happened with Shaw Rose. But I thought the rides were particularly good on the second, third, and fourth place finishers. Pumpkin Rumble, when he broke, I thought he was going to be more forwardly placed, but look, Eurico Rosa de Silva made the right call, clearly, by the way this race was run in the flow. Take back, get down to the inside, save some ground, come with a run. He tipped out, three-path turning for home, and the horse just got out-finished. There's really nothing more to it. Perfect ride. Can't ask for anything more. I bet this horse, and you know what? It is what it is. I got everything I could have asked for out of the horse and out of the rider. No complaints whatsoever, being second best. Final Copy. If you were a fan of this horse, sure, very, very cold on the board, and that had to be a little bit of a concern. But as far as the trip and the rider concerned, you got a quarter and 25 and 1, half and 50 and 1, 3/4 and 14, and you were doing it taking token pressure. This was a beautiful trip, beautiful circumstance. Horse just wasn't good enough on this day. And again, the tote kind of said everything you needed to know about Final Copy's chances throughout. But he ran very fine, I think, to run third. And Camelot Kitten tucked in just behind Final Copy throughout the majority of the run in the pocket. Eventually, Patrick Husbands gets him out into the clear. He actually makes the top at one point just by a nose, and then he flattens out down the lane. Now, the disappointing thing for Camelot Kitten is that he could not outfinish a horse like Final Copy, who was certainly slowing down toward the end of the run. I think the interesting thing for me, Camelot Kitten, I've always thought he's better at middle distances, and I believe he's run pretty darn well on the synthetic in the past, so I wonder if eventually you get him back to a stakes race at Woodbine on the synth as opposed to the turf, and probably at a shorter distance than 1.5 miles. For the rest of the field, there's really not a lot to recommend here. Danish Dynaformer, we've talked about it a number of instances. I spoke about it with Jeff Bratt when we went over the Woodbine Play of the Day on Saturday. Danish Dynaformer, it's been a long time between drinks. This is a pace-dependent horse. I just don't think he can do it anymore, plain and simple. I don't think he wants to run anymore. It's disappointing to see because when he was right, he could really do some good things, but it's just been so long since his last good, true, really representative effort. I have a hard time envisioning a reversal in form at this point. And Johnny Bear seems like that perfect example of a horse that just got really, really good at the right time last year when he won that Northern Dance over a Hawkbill, who is an international proper distance kind of horse. Johnny Bear, I would have liked to have seen him a little bit more forwardly placed in this spot, but again, you know, beggars can't be choosers. It is what it is. He was a little bit of a price in here. He actually took some money. I shouldn't say that. He was a price on the morning line. He didn't run all that well in the local prep for this race, and then he comes in here to this spot and is a little bit disappointing as well. The top 4 horses, I don't think you can complain about trips. I don't think you can complain about anything as far as, oh, I didn't have an instance, I didn't have a chance, I got steady, da-da-da. Top 4 all had beautiful trips, with the exception of the break for Shaw Rose, but it's nice when you're on the best animal. He overcomes that. Now, where does he fit overall? I don't know. The 93 Beyer is still a little bit on the light side. Came home in 23:14, so I suppose there is still some improvement or potential for it. He's only run 8 times, but I do still feel like he is a notch below some sort of a grade 1 caliber animal. But in instances like this and races like this, why can't he be a player to at least get a piece in some bigger spots? Shaw Rose gets the job done in the grade 3 Singspiel up at Woodbine on Saturday afternoon with the 93 Beyer. Final stakes event of the Santa Anita meeting was the Wilshire on Sunday afternoon for fillies and mares going a mile on the turf course. Let's take a look at the field. 9 of them were signed on. Your post-time favorite was Ancient Secret. A horse stretching out in distance. The mile I was always a little bit dubious of. She always felt like she's been better, even when she was on the East Coast with Chad Brown, going shorter, 7/8 of a mile, even 6. She'd gone well down the hill at 6.5. Stretching out to a mile, no given. But you had some other ways that you could have gone in here. One of my old standbys, Beau Recall, was in here. Sophie P., who was a graded stakes winner most recently, was in this field. Sassy Little Lila at one time was one of the better milers as far as the fillies and mares were concerned. None of them were able to get the job done because I don't even want to say a fresh face in Southern California. She had been out there before, then she went to the East Coast. Now she's back on the West Coast. Storm the Hill with a victorious return to Southern California. Here's the stretch run of the Wilshire.
Prut. Sophie P. is blocked behind the horses, and around the outskirts, Storm the Hill is mounting a challenge. Miss Julia Starr on the inside of Cordiality, and Storm the Hill has come at them powerfully, moving past Ancient Secret. Beau Recall late on the scene, but Storm the Hill returning to California for new trainer Phil D'Amato. Wins the Wilshire from Ancient Secret. Cordiality.
Storm the Hill gets the job done at odds of 9-1 over Ancient Secret, who runs second, and Cordiality runs a game third at odds of 13-1. Let's take a look at Storm the Hill, your winner of the 56th running of the Wilshire, a Grade 3 event. She's 4 of 20 lifetime, over $250,000 in career earnings. Owned by Alistar Thoroughbred Company, LLC, and Michael Valdez. Trained by Phil D'Amato. Bred by Kimberly S. Bradley and William B. Bradley in Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Rafael Bejarano. You can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card by Get Stormy out of a good and tough mare named Thornhill. 94 Beyer speed figure for Storm the Hill, winning the Wilshire. Ancient Secret earns a 92, Cordiality a 91, Beau Recall an 88, Sassy Little Lila and Sophie P. each earn 87 Beyers. As far as the final quarter mile times, Storm the Hill comes home in 23:71, Ancient Secret 24:13, Cordiality 24:40. It's worth noting we need to take a look at the fractions of this race. All throughout, 22-4, 45-4, 9-3 for 3 quarters. They were racing up front, which is why I kind of look at this and say Miss Julia Starr runs up the track, who was the pace setter, but the horse that was pushing her throughout, Cordiality, I think this is a much better than it's going to look effort for her, considering she was so close to that pace and still was only beaten by 2 lengths. I also think it was a good effort from Ancient Secret, considering I don't think she wants to go this far. I think she's better going slightly shorter. Problem is, a race like the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint this year is going to be at 5 or 5.5 furlongs. I think that's too short for her, but you never know. We'll wait and see. It sounds like Phil D'Amato has talked about they're unsure ultimately where they're going to run each one of these horses again. It will be at Del Mar, but in what instance and in what fashion, who knows. But Storm the Hill, this was a very impressive effort, and this is a filly that has just slowly come along. She was good early on in her career. It seemed like she sort of plateaued and wasn't really improving at all. Now she gets back to Southern California, and she runs a bang-up effort here. She had a very good pace situation to run at, so I think you need to keep that in the back of your mind and factor that into consideration going forward, taking a look at wherever she may show up next, because in theory she'll be one of the likelier win candidates if nobody else shows up, because we've talked about it for, I think, as long as I've been at the racing form now, so 4 years. It feels like the Southern California fillies and mares, more so than any other division in the entire country, they just take turns beating each other. There is no one boss. It's one after the other after the other, and it's a revolving door. And the trend continues. Sophie P. is up the track here in a spot like this at odds of 7-2. Storm the Hill, we'll find out. Maybe she can sort of calm the tides a little bit, but I would be stunned if all of a sudden she went on a streak of winning 4 or 5 in a row. But this was a good effort, good return to Southern California for her, good effort from each of the other 2 runners, the second and third place finishers. Ancient Secret, again, at a distance I think is a little bit too far for her. And Cordiality, who, again, considering this was a little bit of a hike, a little bit of a class test, she's in raging form. I thought this was an impressive effort. She's another one that I would be interested in coming out of this race just based on race shape. As much as I love Beau Recall, it is very, very difficult to trust her, considering she's going to just be so far outrun early on, and she's not going to get a better pace situation than she got in this race. When they go a half and 45-4, you can't ask for any more than that. And she came with a little run at the end. She came home in 23:77, but when you consider the fact that Storm the Hill, who had a giant jump on her, came home even faster than she did, how can I look at that and say that Beau Recall is going to be able to capitalize on an instance like this? I just wondered, maybe she just never got any better. She earned an 88 Beyer here. That's kind of what she does. High 80 Beyer speed figure. So in most instances, that's not going to be good enough to win a graded stakes race. Storm the Hill, though, interesting runner now for Phil D'Amato. Adds to a strong hand good connections. You know that she's capable of running and she can fly home. She took advantage of a good pace situation, but this was an encouraging effort. She gets the job done in the closing day feature out at Santa Anita, the Grade 3 Wilshire. As we normally do in the recap edition, we will now segue into the stakes montage. Normally, it's anywhere between 6 and 10 races, stretch runs. It'll bring you through all across the country, whatever kind of racing is going on. This week, real light. Only going to be 3 of them. 1 from Canterbury Park, 1 from Belmont Park, and 1 from Woodbine. Without further ado, this week's stakes montage.
Meister trying to pull an upset for 200 large on the outside. Here's No Brag, Just Fact at 42-1. And on the far outside, Sniper Kitten is finishing nicely. No Brag, Just Fact. Sniper Kitten puts the Ramsey blinkers in front. And Sniper Kitten purrs in the Mystic Lake Derby.
And Britannia's let loose on the far outside. Cutting the corner is Punked, and they're into the stretch. And here comes Got Stormy. Got Stormy hits the front. Britannia's finishing fast with Ferdinanda, but Got Stormy kicks away. Got Stormy kicks it in another gear, opens up 2.5. Late run from Punked on the inside, and then Britannia, it's Got Stormy to win it.
And on the outside, just in front. Down the outside, Ellis My Love fighting back. Y'all have a nice day. Then Mizuchi down the extreme outside. Be very, very quiet. Is starting to finish on very, very well. Out in front, Escaminson. Be very, very quiet down the extreme outside. And Eureka Rosa da Silva trying, but Escaminson still in front. Escaminson from Be very, very quiet. Escaminson holding out to win it. Escaminson by a length. Be very, very...
I wasn't kidding. Light week as far as the stakes montage is concerned on the recap edition, but we still do it nonetheless. 3 races, 3 good ones from all across the country, all across the continent for that matter. Let's take a look at the weekend's best performances from a buyer speed figure standpoint. As we always do, it doesn't matter whatever the gender is, whatever the distance, surface, we got it all covered for you. Before you know it, we'll be adding the 2-year-olds back to this list because Del Mar and Saratoga are just around the corner. But for the time being, here we go. We take it from the top. 3-year-old males on dirt, the best performances from a buyer speed figure standpoint, 2 of them. Core Beliefs, Lone Sailor, they're separated by just a whisker. In the Ohio Derby, they both earned 93 buyer speed figures. 3-year-old females on dirt, Perfect Miss, an 83 buyer speed figure, and a non-winners of 1 other than at Belmont Park. 3-year-old males on turf, you just saw the stretch run. Sniper Kitten earns an 87 buyer, winning the Mystic Lake Derby at Canterbury. 3-year-old fillies on turf, Got Stormy, you just saw her win the Wild Applause at Belmont Park with an 88 buyer speed figure. Older males on dirt, St. Joe Bay and American Anthem. American Anthem gets the job done over St. Joe Bay. They each earn 105 buyer speed figures in the San Carlos at Santa Anita. Older female on dirt, Hot Shot Anna. Now this one, again, a little bit of a caveat. Those of you that are familiar with the recap edition, I've brought it up internally in Daily Racing Forms databases. Synthetic races show up as dirt races. So Hot Shot Anna earns a 101 winning the Chicago Handicap at Arlington Park. I recognize and realize that that is run on a synthetic surface, but for this purpose, that will be considered the fastest as far as the dirt is concerned for the older fillies and mares. You get a 101 buyer for Hot Shot Anna. Older male on turf, we have a tie between Highland Sky and Called Provision. They each earn 103s and an optional claimer at Belmont Park. And older fillies on turf, Storm the Hill, we saw her in the Wilshire. She gets the job done impressively in a return to Southern California with a 94 buyer speed figure. There you have it. The weekend's best performances from a buyer speed figure standpoint on the recap edition of the Matt Bernier Show. Thank you for bearing with me here if you've been listening podcast, because unfortunately this week that's the only version. YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com. If you listen on YouTube, click that subscribe button. You get all the latest stuff from DRFTV. Give us a thumbs up. If you listen on iTunes, write us a little bit of a review. Give us a nice rating. Greatly appreciated. Thank all of you for sticking around, bearing with me. I'm not very sharp right now. The travel is starting to catch up with me a little bit, but we truck through it. We get done. If you normally listen to it live, it's normally the recap is on Tuesdays. The preview edition is on Fridays. That would be on noon, at noon Eastern anyway. Live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. This upcoming week, big week of racing here with DRF TV. Let's take a look at the schedule. You've got all sorts of DRF Bets races a day, including the Queen's Plate. from Woodbine as the time this is being recorded, or at the time this is being recorded, great English, it sounds like there are 16 probable horses to be running mile and a quarter in Canada's version of the Kentucky Derby. That's going to be very exciting. We'll go over that later on in the week, excuse me. You'll also have Formulator Angles. You will have Weekend Warrior. You will have Watchmaker Watch. You will have the latest edition of Out of the Gate. You will have the DRF Players podcast with Peter Thomas Fornenthal and Jonathan Kinchin. And you will have the latest edition of the Matt Bernier Show, the preview edition. We'll dive into a number of races, and I'm sure we will go deep into a race like the Queen's Plate. So again, thank you for listening in the podcast form this week. The recap edition will be back in its normal time slot live next Tuesday at noon Eastern. And without further ado, or I shouldn't even say that because there's nothing really following here, until we speak again in the preview edition, best of luck however you're playing, whatever you're playing, wherever you're playing. This has been the recap edition of the Matt Bernier Show.